I was standing in the hallway, with a tray of tea in my hands when I heard Jessica's voice from the living room. Low, but not low enough. She told her friends I clean well, but my presence is suffocating. I did not drop the tray. I did not gasp. I just stood there against the wall, listening to my own daughter-in-law describe me like a smell that won't leave the carpet. My name is Margaret Hale. I am 72 years old, and 3 weeks ago I was still living in my son Ryan's house. In the small guest room at the back, the one with the window that faces the garden I planted myself 2 springs ago. That night, Jessica had her friends over. Ashley, Courtney, and Megan. What she calls a girls' night. And I had spent the whole afternoon making pastries because I wanted them to like me. Because some foolish part of me still believed that if I tried hard enough, I would stop feeling like a guest in my own family. I was halfway down the hallway with the tray when I heard my name. Jessica was laughing, that laugh people use when they think no one's listening. She cleans well, Jessica said, but her presence is just suffocating. I can't even breathe in my own house anymore. Every time I turn around, she's there. The room laughed with her. Courtney said something about free childcare being lucky. Jessica said luck had nothing to do with it, that the price of free childcare was losing all privacy in her own home. Ashley asked if she'd told Ryan. Jessica's voice went sharp. He won't hear it, she said. He thinks his mother's a saint. I stood there maybe 30 seconds. My hands didn't shake. I walked back into the kitchen and set the tray down on the counter. And I looked at those pastries I had spent 3 hours shaping and baking, and something in me went very, very quiet. Not angry, not yet. Quiet the way a house goes quiet right before a storm finds it. I want you to understand something about a woman my age. We do not throw plates. We do not scream in hallways. We have spent 50, 60, 70 years learning how to swallow things whole and keep walking, because somebody always needed us to keep walking. A husband, a child, a job, a bill that wouldn't pay itself. So that night, I did not walk back into that living room and demand an explanation. I went down the hall to my little room, the one with the garden window, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and I let my mind do what it had refused to do for 2 straight years. I let it remember everything honestly for the first time. I remembered the small sigh Jessica gave whenever I offered to help cook dinner, a sigh so quiet most people would never catch it. But I am not most people. I raised a child alone for 11 years after my husband. Edward died of a heart attack in our garage when Ryan was 9. I worked double shifts at a diner on Route 9 for over a decade so my son could have shoes that fit him and a roof that didn't leak when it rained. A woman who survives that kind of life does not miss a sigh. I remembered how Jessica always changed the subject fast whenever I asked about weekend plans. Like she was afraid I might invite myself somewhere. I remembered the family trip to the coast last summer that I only learned about because my granddaughter, Sophie, mentioned the beach with such excitement, and I had to smile and nod like I already knew, when really I'd found out from an 8-year-old slip of the tongue. I remembered all the small ways I had been quietly moved to the edges of my own son's life, and how I had explained every single one of them away, because the truth was too heavy to hold. I did not sleep that night. Around 4 in the morning, I made myself tea and sat at that kitchen table in the dark. The same table where I had served thousands of meals over 2 years. And I made a decision. I would not scream. I would not corner Jessica in front of her friends. I would not become the bitter old woman. She already believed me to be behind closed doors. I would simply step back, quietly, completely, and I would let them see exactly what their lives looked like, without me filling every single gap they didn't even know I was filling. The next morning, I waited until Jessica left to drive the children to school, and I sat my son down at that same table. Ryan is a good man, gentle like his father was, and when I told him I thought it was time I found my own place again, his face went pale. He asked if something had happened. I told him only that I missed having my own space, my own rhythm, that 2 years was a long time to live in, someone else's house no matter how loved you felt there. I did not mention what I heard. I have never been the kind of mother who puts her son in the middle of a war between 2 women he loves. That is not strength, that is cruelty, and I refuse to be cruel even when I have every right to be hurt. Ryan argued with me for almost an hour. He said I belonged there, that the kids needed me, that he didn't know what they'd do without me picking. Sophie and Lucas up from school every day, helping with homework, having dinner ready by 6. I let him talk. I let him list every single thing I did for that household. Every single thing Jessica had called suffocating the night before, and I simply nodded and told him my mind was made up. I am 72, not senile, and once I decide something, it gets decided. Jessica came home around noon and found us still at the table. Ryan told her what I'd said, and I watched her face very closely. The way I used to watch storm clouds gather over the diner parking lot, learning to read what was coming before it arrived. For just a moment, barely a second, something crossed her face that wasn't sadness. It was relief. She covered it fast, said all the things you're supposed to say, that I shouldn't feel like I had to leave, that I was always welcome, that the kids would be devastated. But I had heard her real voice the night before. And I knew the difference between her real voice and her performance voice now. The way you learn the difference between real, thunder and a passing truck once. You've lived through enough storms. I told her I appreciated that. And I meant it as kindly as I could manage. And then I went to my room and began quietly packing 2 years of my life into the same 3 suitcases I had arrived with. I found a small apartment within the week, a modest 1-bedroom above a bakery, the kind of place that smells like fresh bread every morning starting at 5, which I have always loved. It was not luxurious. The water pressure was weak and the radiator clanked at night, but it was mine, fully and completely mine. And the first night I slept there alone, I slept better than I had in 2 years. Because for the first time in a long time, no one's sigh was waiting for me in the morning. Here is where the story takes the turn you are waiting for. Because I know you are waiting for it. I did not call Ryan every day begging to see the children. I did not post sad things on the family group chat hoping someone would notice. I simply lived my new small life, quietly, and let 2 years of invisible labor reveal itself the way water reveals a leak only after it's gone. The first thing to fall apart was the school pickup. Within 4 days, Jessica realized that someone had to be at Lincoln Elementary by 3:15 every single afternoon, rain or shine, and that someone could no longer be the woman she'd called suffocating, because that woman now lived 11 minutes away by car, with no spare key to anyone's life. Ryan had to leave his job early 3 times in 1 week, and his manager, a man named Mr. Doyle who had been patient with him for years, finally pulled him aside and told him this couldn't keep happening. I heard about this not from Ryan, but from my granddaughter Sophie, who called me one evening just to talk. Because children, unlike adults, never stop loving you just because the address changed. The second thing to fall apart was dinner. I had been quietly running that household's kitchen for 2 years, planning meals, shopping efficiently, cooking from scratch every single night. Jessica, I learned, did not actually enjoy cooking, had never enjoyed it. And within 2 weeks, the family was eating takeout 4 or 5 nights a week, the kind of expense that adds up fast on 2 incomes already stretched by a mortgage and 2 children's activities. Lucas, who is 7 and stubborn about food the way only 7-year-olds can be, started refusing to eat half of what Jessica ordered, and bedtime, which used to be calm in that house, apparently became a nightly battle. The third thing, and this is the one that I think finally cracked something open in Jessica, was the house itself. I am not a woman who likes to brag about cleaning, but I will say this honestly. For 2 years, that house was spotless because I made it spotless, quietly, every single day, without anyone asking me to and without anyone thanking me for it. Within 3 weeks of my absence, Jessica's friend Megan came over for coffee and, according to what Sophie later told me on the phone with the innocent honesty only a child has, said something like, "Wow, it's a lot messier in here than I remember." Right in front of Jessica. I did not orchestrate any of this. I want to be very clear about that. Because I am not a woman who plots and schemes. I am simply a woman who stopped quietly, absorbing the weight of a household that had made it very clear it did not want me there. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all, and let people feel the shape of the hole you left. Ryan called me almost every day during that 3rd week. At first the calls were short, checking in, asking how the new apartment was. Careful, polite. By the end of the week, they had changed. He started asking real questions. He asked how I used to get Lucas to eat his vegetables. He asked what detergent I used on Sophie's soccer uniform that got grass stains out so well. He asked almost shyly, like a much younger version of himself, whether I might come by on Sunday for dinner, just dinner, nothing more. I said yes because I am still his mother, and a mother's love does not switch off just because her feelings were hurt. But I want you to know I did not rush back. I did not show up eager and grateful to be invited back into a house that had called me suffocating. I went on Sunday at exactly the time we agreed on. I brought a pie because that is who I am. And I sat at that table as a guest, not as the woman who used to silently run the place. Dinner that night was telling. Jessica had attempted a roast chicken, and it was dry, badly seasoned, the kind of meal that comes from someone who is trying but doesn't yet have the instinct for it. The instinct that only comes from doing something for years. The children ate quietly, politely, the way children eat when they are hungry but not particularly enjoying their food. Ryan looked tired in a way I hadn't seen since he was working 2 jobs in his 20s. Dark circles, a kind of frayed patience in his voice when Lucas knocked over his water glass. And Jessica, for the first time in 2 years, looked at me differently. Not with that polite, distant smile she usually wore around me, but with something rawer. Somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd week without me, I think she had finally done the math, the real math, the kind that has nothing to do with money. She had counted the hours. She had felt the absence of someone who had quietly been holding up half her life. After dinner, while Ryan put the children to bed, Jessica asked if she could speak with me alone in the living room, the same living room where I'd once heard her call my presence suffocating. I sat down across from her, calm, my hands folded in my lap the way my own mother taught me to sit when something serious was about to be said. Jessica's hands were shaking slightly when she spoke. She told me she knew. She said, Sophie had let it slip weeks ago that she'd heard part of what was said that night. The girls' night, and that Sophie, bless that child's honest heart, had asked Jessica directly why she said Grandma was suffocating, when Grandma was the nicest person Sophie knew. Jessica said she had been carrying that conversation around for weeks, turning it over and over, especially as the house got messier, and the dinners got worse and Ryan got more exhausted, and the kids got crankier. And she said she finally understood, really understood, not in some abstract way but in her bones, what she had actually been losing when she pushed me out. She apologized. Not the quick, performative apology I'd grown used to hearing from her over 2 years, the kind meant to smooth things over fast so everyone could move on. This was slower, more broken, full of long pauses where she had to stop and collect herself. She said she had been overwhelmed when I first moved in, that she'd felt like she lost control of her own home, that instead of talking to me honestly like an adult, she let that resentment build quietly until it spilled out, sideways to her friends instead of to me, where it belonged. She said she was ashamed of the word she used, suffocating. She said it wasn't true, that it had never really been true, that what she actually felt suffocated by was her own pride, her own fear of admitting she needed help and didn't know how to ask for it without feeling like she'd failed as a wife and mother. I sat with that for a long moment before I answered her, because I wanted my words to be honest, not just comforting. I told her that what hurt me wasn't that she struggled with having me there, because 2 women running 1 kitchen is never simple, and I understood that better than she realized. What hurt me was that she never once tried to tell me that to my face. She let me serve her family with my whole heart for 2 years while quietly resenting me behind a closed door, and that is a particular kind of loneliness, being loved with one hand and dismissed with the other. Jessica cried then, real tears, not the kind people use to escape a hard conversation, but the kind that come from actually facing one. She asked if there was any way I could forgive her, and if I would consider coming back, not as a built-in nanny and housekeeper this time, but as family, with boundaries we'd actually talk about out loud instead of guessing at. I am 72 years old, and if life has taught me anything, it is that holding on to bitterness costs the person holding it far more than the person who caused it. I forgave her. Not instantly, not as some easy reflex, but because I watched her actually change in the weeks that followed. Not just apologize once and expect everything to reset. She started calling to ask my opinion instead of avoiding me. She started inviting me over because she wanted to see me, not because she needed free labor. She started thanking me out loud for things she used to take silently for granted. I did move back in eventually, about 6 weeks after that night in the hallway, but it looked different this time. We sat down together, the three of us, Ryan, Jessica, and me, and we actually talked about what each of us needed. I told them I needed to be asked, not assumed upon. I needed someone to say thank you out loud once in a while instead of treating my help like furniture that was just supposed to be there. I needed my own space within their space, time that was mine, a door I could close without anyone reading it as me being cold. Jessica agreed to all of it, and more than that, she has kept her word. We have our disagreements still, of course we do. No two women share a kitchen without friction now and then. But it is honest friction now, spoken out loud, not whispered to friends in a living room while I stand frozen in a hallway holding a tray of tea. Sometimes Sophie climbs into my lap now and tells me she's glad I'm home. And Lucas still mispronounces my name as Grandma. Margie, even though I've told him 100 times it's Margaret. And Ryan looks less tired than he did during those 6 weeks I was gone. And Jessica, my Jessica, the same woman who once called my presence suffocating, now sits beside me most evenings while we cook dinner together. Actually together, talking, laughing sometimes, building the kind of relationship we should have built honestly, from the very beginning instead of one, built on silence and assumption. I think about that night in the hallway often, the tray of tea in my hands, the words that nearly broke something in me that I wasn't sure could be repaired. And I am grateful, strange as it sounds, that I heard them, because if I hadn't, I might still be quietly disappearing into the corners of my own family's life, mistaking silence for peace and exhaustion for love. Sometimes the hardest words to hear are the ones that finally set you free enough to demand to be loved properly, out loud, with your whole self seen. If you have a grandmother who gave her whole life to her family the way I gave mine, tell me where you're from. Comment your city below. And if this story reminded you of her, if it made you think of everything she's done quietly without ever asking for thanks, then like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Go call her today. Tell her you see her. Don't wait for a hallway and a tray of tea to find out how much she's carrying for you in silence.